The money is gone, Emma. We've transferred everything to Jason's family, my parents announced with smug smiles. You should have been more supportive of our new family. I calmly replied, that's interesting because grandmother's real fortune was hidden where they'd never think to look. The living room felt smaller than usual when my parents called me over for what they described as an important family discussion. My stepmother sat perched on the edge of the leather sofa, her manicured nails drumming against her wine glass. Dad stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, wearing that particular expression I'd come to recognize over the past 4 years since he'd married Susan. Susan wasn't my biological mother. Mom had died when I was 14 from ovarian cancer, a brutal 18-month battle that hollowed out our family and left Dad a shell of himself. For 2 years, he wandered through life like a ghost, and I'd taken care of both of us, learning to cook his favorite meals, managing the household bills, making sure he remembered to eat. Then Susan appeared at his accounting firm, a recently divorced woman with a 7-year-old son named Jason, and suddenly Dad came back to life. The transformation happened quickly. Too quickly, if I'm being honest. Within 6 months, they were married in a small ceremony I wasn't consulted about. Within a year, Susan and Jason had moved into our home, the house where my mother's presence still lingered in every corner. Within 18 months, I'd become the outsider in my own family. Emma, we've made a decision about your grandmother's estate, Dad began, his voice carrying that new tone he'd adopted since the remarriage, distant and formal, like I was a difficult client rather than his daughter. My grandmother had passed away 4 months earlier at the age of 89. Helen Richardson had been a force of nature, a woman who'd built a successful chain of boutique hotels across the Northeast through sheer determination and business acumen. She'd raised my father as a single mother after my grandfather died young, putting herself through night school while working 2 jobs. Every achievement she'd earned, she'd fought for with bloody knuckles and stubborn pride. Growing up, I'd spend every summer with her, learning the hotel business from the ground up. She'd had me working the front desk at 12, managing inventory at 15, reviewing financial statements at 17. Those summers shaped who I became, teaching me that respect was earned through competence and dedication, never handed out freely. Your grandmother left a substantial estate, Susan interjected, her voice tripping with false sweetness. And we've decided it's only fair to divide it equally among all family members. All family members, I repeated slowly, already sensing where this conversation was heading. Jason is part of this family now, Dad said firmly. He deserves the same opportunities you've had. Jason, currently 10 years old, had never met my grandmother. She died 2 weeks before Susan finally agreed to bring him for an introduction, an appointment that kept getting postponed for various reasons. Grandmother had never commented on it directly, but I caught her expression when I mentioned the latest cancellation, disappointment mixed with knowing resignation. The trust fund your grandmother established, Susan continued, pulling out a folder of documents, contained approximately $1.2 million, along with several properties and investment accounts. We've restructured everything. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. We've transferred your college fund to Jason's name, Dad announced. He'll need it for his education, and you're already 23. If you'd finished your degree on time instead of taking those gap years, this wouldn't be an issue. Those gap years had been spent caring for my dying grandmother during her final battle with congestive heart failure, moving into her apartment to provide round-the-clock care because the assisted living facility felt too impersonal, too cold for someone who'd spent her life building warmth for others. I deferred my final year at Boston University to be with her, holding her hand through the pain, reading her favorite novels aloud, making sure she wasn't alone. Dad knew this. He'd visited exactly 3 times in those 8 months. The beach house in Maine has been sold, Susan added, checking off items on her list with obvious satisfaction. Jason needs orthodontic work, and the real estate market was favorable. We got $890,000 for it. That beach house held every good memory of my childhood. The porch where Mom and I had watched thunderstorms roll in across the Atlantic. The kitchen where grandmother taught me to make her famous blueberry pie. The dock where Dad and I used to fish before dawn, talking about everything and nothing. The investment portfolio has been liquidated and redistributed, Dad continued. Susan and I will manage Jason's education fund, along with establishing a trust for any future children we might have. Future children. The phrase hung in the air like a slap. You should have been more supportive of our new family, Susan added, her mask of pleasantness finally slipping. Instead, you've been hostile and unwelcoming since day one. This is a consequence of your actions. Hostile. Because I'd objected when they redecorated Mom's sewing room without asking. Unwelcoming. Because I'd refused to call Susan Mom after she demanded it at their wedding reception. Unsupportive. Because I'd questioned why Jason needed a $40,000 dirt bike when we'd always lived modestly. So just to clarify, I said carefully, keeping my voice steady, you've transferred everything, grandmother's entire estate, to Jason's accounts? Everything, Dad confirmed with finality. The money is gone, Emma. We've transferred everything to Jason's family. This is what's fair. Susan smiled, a thin, victorious expression. You're an adult now. It's time you learn to stand on your own feet instead of relying on family money. This coming from a woman who'd quit her job the moment the marriage certificate was signed. That's interesting, I replied calmly, reaching for my bag. Dad frowned at my tone. That's all you have to say? For now, yes. That's very interesting indeed. Susan's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You're taking this remarkably well. What would you like me to do? Cry? Scream? Throw things? I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder. You've made your decision. I respect that. The confusion on their faces was almost comical. They clearly expected an explosion, a dramatic scene they could later use to justify their actions. Poor Emma, so emotional, so unstable, this is why we had to protect Jason's interests. There's something else, Dad said, pulling out another document. We need you to sign this. I scanned the paper quickly. It was a legal waiver, confirming I'd received my full and complete inheritance from Helen Richardson's estate and relinquishing any future claims. You want me to sign away my rights to contest this? I asked. There's nothing to contest, Susan snapped. This is what your father decided, and he's the executor of the estate. Actually, that wasn't entirely accurate, but I didn't correct her. I'll need to have my attorney review this, I said, folding the document and tucking it into my bag. Your attorney? Dad scoffed. You don't have an attorney. Actually, I do. Grandmother introduced me to Martha Chen 3 years ago. She's been quite helpful with various matters. Susan's expression shifted, suspicion blooming into something closer to alarm. What matters? Oh, you know. This and that. I'll be in touch after Martha reviews everything. I headed toward the door, then paused. By the way, how's the hotel business looking these days? What hotel business? Dad asked, confused. Grandmother's hotel chain. Richardson Hospitality Group. The business she spent 40 years building. I assume you've been managing it since her death? Those properties were sold years ago, Susan said quickly. Everyone knows that. Really? That's odd. I could have sworn I saw recent tax documents for at least 6 active properties. But I must be mistaken. I smiled pleasantly. Anyway, I'll let you get back to your evening. Congratulations on the restructuring, by the way. Very thorough. I left before they could respond, hearing Susan's urgent whisper to Dad as I closed the door behind me. The drive to my apartment took 30 minutes, plenty of time to reflect on the spectacular miscalculation my father and stepmother had just made. They'd been so focused on the obvious assets, the ones clearly listed in grandmother's will, the trust fund and properties and investment accounts, that they'd missed the real fortune. Entirely. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as memories flooded back. There was a moment, about 6 months after Dad married Susan, when I tried to bridge the gap between us. I'd organized a family dinner, cooking Mom's recipes, setting the table with the good china we only used for special occasions. Susan had arrived late, taken one look at the spread and announced she was gluten-free now and couldn't eat any of it. She'd ordered takeout on her phone while sitting at my carefully prepared table. Dad had said nothing. Just smiled apologetically and picked at his food while Susan scrolled through her phone, showing Jason videos with the volume turned up. That was when I started to understand that the father I'd known was disappearing, replaced by someone who'd rather keep the peace than stand up for what mattered. The breaking point came last Christmas. I'd saved for months to buy Dad a restored vintage watch, the same model his father had worn. Something meaningful, connecting him to his past, to who he used to be. Susan, Had unwrapped her gift from him first, a diamond tennis bracelet that must have cost $15,000. Then Jason opened his new gaming computer, top of the line, another $3,000 at least. When Dad opened my gift, his eyes had actually welled up. He clutched that watch like it was a lifeline, and for just a moment, I saw my real father again. Then Susan made a comment about living in the past being unhealthy, and he carefully set the watch aside. I found it weeks later in his desk drawer, still in its box, never worn. That's when I called grandmother, breaking down on the phone about feeling invisible in my own family. She listened quietly, then said something I didn't fully understand at the time. People show you who they are, darling. Your job is to believe them and plan accordingly. Don't worry. I've been planning to. The traffic light turned green, snapping me back to the present. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I waited until I parked to check it. This isn't over. Jason deserves what's rightfully his. You'll regret being so selfish. Susan's number, clearly not blocked on all her devices. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Martha with a simple note, documentation. Another text came through, this time from Dad's number. Please call me. We need to talk about this like adults. I'm your father. Like adults. As if adults stole from their children and then demanded civil conversation about it. As if the title father meant something when he'd spent 3 years proving he'd rather be Susan's husband than my parent. I didn't respond to either message. Walking into my apartment felt like entering a sanctuary. It was small, just a one-bedroom place in Somerville I'd been renting since college, but it was mine. No one had redecorated it without permission. No one had erased memories to make room for new ones. The photos of Mom still hung on the walls. Her favorite throw blanket still draped across the couch. Susan had once suggested I move on from my grief, as if love for a dead parent had an expiration date. She'd been in my life for barely a year at that point, and she was already trying to erase a woman who'd raised me for 14 years. The audacity was almost impressive. Grandmother had been many things, shrewd, cautious, and deeply aware that money changed people. She'd watched her own sisters fight viciously over their mother's estate, relationships destroyed over furniture and jewelry and perceived slights. She'd sworn her children would never endure the same fate. So she'd gotten creative. The story officially told was that Richardson Hospitality Group had been sold in 2019 to a large hotel conglomerate for an undisclosed sum. Press releases were issued. Articles appeared in trade publications. Grandmother retired from public life, moving into a modest apartment in Cambridge, living comfortably but unremarkably on what appeared to be investment income and Social Security. What actually happened was considerably different. Grandmother hadn't sold the business. She'd restructured it through a complex web of LLCs and holding companies, removing her name from any public-facing documents. The hotels continued operating under new management companies, but ownership remained firmly in family hands. Specifically, in a trust she'd established years earlier with one named beneficiary, me. You're the only one who understands what I built, she told me during one of our late-night conversations in her hospital room. Your father is a good man, but he never wanted this life. He became an accountant specifically to avoid the hotel business. But you, Emma, you have the fire? You understand that this isn't just about money, it's about legacy. The trust wouldn't become accessible until I turned 25 or upon her death, whichever came first. She died 4 months ago, 2 weeks before my 24th birthday, and the trust had activated immediately. For the past 16 weeks, I'd been working with Martha Chen and a team of financial advisors to understand the full scope of what I'd inherited. Richardson Hospitality Group currently owned 8 boutique hotels across Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. The properties generated approximately $12 million in annual revenue, with profit margins healthy enough to fund continual reinvestment and expansion. The total value of the portfolio, including real estate and business assets, was conservatively estimated at $47 million. Grandmother had also been quietly investing in commercial real estate for decades, purchasing small apartment buildings and retail properties in gentrifying neighborhoods long before they became fashionable. That portfolio was worth another $18 million and growing. Then there were the stocks, bonds, and various other investments managed through private wealth advisors who'd been under strict instructions to maintain absolute confidentiality. Another $8 million, give or take. All told, I'd inherited approximately $73 million in assets, none of which appeared in the will Dad had probated. That document had been a deliberate misdirection, listing the family assets grandmother knew would cause conflict. The trust fund, the beach house, the obvious investment accounts, those were honey to attract flies, tokens she'd sacrificed to reveal people's true nature. Let them show you who they are, she'd advised. Then you'll know exactly how to proceed. Dad had shown me. So had Susan. They'd taken the bait completely, revealing the depth of their selfishness and their willingness to betray me for what they perceived as financial gain. They'd grabbed $1.2 million and felt clever doing it, never suspecting they were fighting over scraps while the real feast lay untouched. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my apartment parking lot. Martha Chen. I assume they told you? She said without preamble. Just finished the meeting. They want me to sign a waiver. Absolutely not. Don't sign anything. We need to discuss strategy. Come over. I'll order Chinese food. We have planning to do. Martha arrived an hour later, arms full of file folders and her laptop bag. She was a tiny woman in her 60s, barely 5 feet tall, with iron gray hair and the sharp eyes of a predator. She'd been grandmother's attorney for 30 years, handling everything from business acquisitions to the occasional lawsuit from competitors who'd underestimated the little old lady with the boutique hotel chain. They're panicking, Martha announced, spreading documents across my kitchen table. Your father called my office 4 times this afternoon. Susan left 3 voicemails demanding to know about the other assets you mentioned. Good. Let them sweat. The problem is, they're starting to realize they might have made a mistake. We need to act before they try to reverse course or challenge the trust. Can they challenge it? Not successfully. Your grandmother's estate planning was bulletproof. I made sure of it. But they could create legal headaches, delay things, make your life difficult out of spite. So what do we do? Martha smiled, the expression reminding me eerily of grandmother. We go on offense. Your father is the executor of the probate estate, the assets listed in the will. But he's also been making representations about your grandmother's full estate, including properties and assets he has no legal authority over. That's a problem. How big a problem? Potentially fraudulent misrepresentation, depending on how far he's gone. Did he specifically state that he transferred your entire inheritance? I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder app I'd activated before the meeting. Let me play you the conversation. Martha listened intently, her expression growing more satisfied with each word. When Dad's voice declared the money is gone, Emma. We've transferred everything to Jason's family, she actually laughed. Perfect. He's explicitly claimed authority over assets he doesn't control. And this waiver they want you to sign? She held up the document I'd given her. This references all assets from the estate of Helen Richardson, not just the probate assets. If you'd signed this, they'd argue you'd waived rights to the trust as well. Even though the trust is a separate legal entity? They'd try. It wouldn't hold up, but it would muddy the waters enough to cause problems. The fact that they prepared this document suggests someone advised them there might be other assets floating around. Susan has a cousin who's a lawyer. Real estate law, I think. Amateur hour. Martha made a note. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to send a formal letter through my office, informing your father that you declined to sign the waiver and that you're retaining counsel regarding the estate. This establishes a clear paper trail. Then we wait exactly 1 week. Let them worry. Let them consult with Susan's cousin and whoever else they can find. Let them realize they're in over their heads. And after a week? Martha's smile widened. After a week, you're going to invite them to lunch. Somewhere nice, somewhere public. And you're going to explain exactly what they tried to steal from you. Just explain it? No legal action? That depends entirely on their response. If they're appropriately apologetic and willing to return Jason's inheritance without further fuss, we can settle this quietly. If they double down? She shrugged. Then we pursue every legal remedy available. Fraudulent misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, take your pick. You think they'll fight? I think your father is under Susan's thumb, and Susan has dollar signs in her eyes. She's going to push him to fight for what she thinks is rightfully Jason's. Which means we need to be prepared for war. Grandmother would have enjoyed this. Your grandmother planned this, Martha corrected. Why do you think she structured everything the way she did? She knew exactly what would happen after she died. She watched your father change, saw how Susan operated. This was her final test for everyone involved. And if I'd been the greedy one? If I tried to keep everything from Jason? Then the trust had provisions to distribute portions to various charities. But Helen knew you. She knew you'd grown up watching your mother's generosity, seeing how she helped others even when our family had very little. She knew you'd spent your gap years caring for her instead of partying with college friends. She knew your character, Emma. That's why you're sitting here with a $73 million inheritance while your father fights over the scraps you left behind. The letter went out 3 days later on Martha's firm letterhead. Formal, legally precise, declining to sign the waiver and requesting a complete accounting of all actions taken regarding Helen Richardson's estate. We sent it certified mail, requiring signature, ensuring there'd be no question they'd received it. Dad called within hours. Emma, what the hell is this? You're retaining an attorney? Against your own father? You tried to take my inheritance, Dad. What did you expect? We redistributed family assets in a fair manner. Jason deserves exactly what grandmother chose to leave him, which was nothing. She never met him. She had no relationship with him. Why would she leave him anything? Because he's family now. Is he? Because it seems like I stopped being family the moment Susan came into the picture. When's the last time you and I had dinner alone? When did you last ask about my life, my goals, my dreams? Silence on the other end. That's what I thought, I continued. You made your choice, Dad. You chose Susan and Jason over me. You chose to erase Mom's memory by redecorating her spaces. You chose to exclude me from family decisions. Now you're surprised there are consequences? Your mother would be ashamed of you. The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my voice level. Mom would be heartbroken that you've become someone she wouldn't recognize. She would hate what you've done to our family. And she'd be furious that you're using her memory to justify it. I hung up before he could respond. Susan tried next, leaving a voicemail that started conciliatory and ended threatening. Jason was just a child, didn't I care about children? How could I be so selfish? They'd fight this with everything they had. I'd regret making enemies of my own family. I saved all of it. Documentation. The week crawled by. Martha fielded increasingly frantic calls from Dad and angry messages from Susan. Their attorney cousin apparently explained enough about trust law to make them realize they might have seriously miscalculated, which only increased their desperation. They want to meet, Martha informed me on day 6. They're demanding it, actually. Susan used the word demand 3 times in her last voicemail. Perfect. Set it up for tomorrow. Somewhere nice. The harbor room? Ideal. I spent that evening preparing, reviewing every document Martha had compiled, memorizing figures and dates. This wasn't just about confronting them with the truth. This was about ensuring they understood the magnitude of their mistake, the depth of their betrayal, and the permanence of its consequences. My phone rang around midnight. Dad's number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message on speaker. Emma, it's Dad. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about when you were little. How we used to have pancake sundaes, remember? You'd help me flip them and we'd make shapes. A dinosaur for you, a heart for your mom. His voice cracked. I don't know when everything got so complicated. Susan thinks. Well, she has opinions about how families should work, about fairness and equality. But maybe I should have. I just want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Tomorrow, let's talk. Really talk. Just you and me, like we used to. I love you, sweetheart. I hope you know that. I saved the message, but not out of sentimentality. It was evidence of his awareness, proof that he knew something was wrong even if he wouldn't admit what. He remembered who we'd been, which meant he knew exactly what he'd chosen to throw away. Sleep came in fragments that night. I dreamed of the beach house, of Mom teaching me to body surf in the cold Atlantic water, laughing as waves knocked us over. I dreamed of grandmother's apartment, the smell of her perfume and old books, the sound of her voice explaining compound interest and asset diversification like they were fairy tales. I dreamed of Dad, the old version, The one who'd taught me to ride a bike and attended at every school play, who'd held me while I sobbed after Mom died and promised we'd get through it together. That version of Dad had died somewhere along the way. Maybe grief had killed him. Maybe loneliness had. Or maybe Susan had simply offered him an easier path, one where he didn't have to remember the past or honor the dead, where he could pretend to be someone new. Either way, the man I was meeting tomorrow wasn't really my father anymore. He was a stranger wearing my father's face, and I needed to stop expecting him to suddenly become the person he used to be. Morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit grandmother had bought me for college interviews. Professional, composed, unshakable. I braided my hair the way Mom used to do it, a small armor of memory. The Harbor Room was an upscale restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor, the kind of place that required reservations weeks in advance unless you knew the right people. I knew the right people because I owned the building. It was one of Richardson Hospitality Group's commercial properties, a mixed-use development with restaurants on the ground floor and luxury apartments above. I called ahead to speak with Marcus, the restaurant manager, explaining the situation in broad strokes. He'd been enthusiastic about helping, especially after I mentioned I was Helen Richardson's granddaughter. Turned out grandmother had hired his mother as a housekeeper at one of the hotels 20 years ago, paying for her nursing school and helping her build a career. The family remembered. Private booth in the back, Marcus promised. And I'll personally ensure you're not disturbed unless you signal otherwise. Dad and Susan arrived exactly on time, both dressed like they were heading to a funeral. Appropriate, really. They'd be mourning their greed shortly. Emma, Dad began stiffly, sitting across from me in the booth. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course. We're family, right? The word tasted bitter. Susan wasted no time. We've spoken with our attorney, and he's advised us that the trust you mentioned is separate from the probate estate. We understand there may have been some confusion about the assets. Confusion, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? What your father did was redistribute the probate assets in good faith, believing he was acting in the best interests of the entire family. We didn't know about any separate trust. Because you didn't ask? Because you didn't care. You saw money and grabbed it. Dad's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait. Do you have any idea what grandmother actually left me? What you tried to sign away with that waiver? They exchanged glances. Susan's attorney cousin had clearly given them enough information to worry but not enough to understand the full scope. I pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. This is a summary of the Richardson Family Trust, established by Helen Richardson in 2018. It contains 8 hotel properties, 16 commercial real estate holdings, and a diversified investment portfolio. Total value, approximately $73 million. The color drained from Susan's face. Dad's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. That's impossible, Susan finally whispered. The hotels were sold. They were restructured. Grandmother was extremely clever about asset protection and estate planning. She knew exactly what she was doing. $73 million, Dad repeated, his voice hollow. Give or take. The portfolio grows annually, so that number will increase over time. Meanwhile, you've been fighting over $1.2 million like dogs over a bone, destroying what's left of our relationship in the process. Emma, sweetie, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding, Susan began, her voice taking on a wheedling tone I'd heard her use with Jason. Of course we didn't know about the trust. If we'd known, we never would have. Would have what? Stolen from me? Tried to force me to sign away my rights? Told me I should have been more supportive while you erased my mother's memory and excluded me from the family? That's not fair, Dad protested weakly. What's not fair is that my own father prioritized his new wife and stepson over his daughter. What's not fair is that you took the college fund grandmother established for me, the granddaughter she actually knew and loved, and gave it to a child she never met. What's not fair is that you sold the beach house, the last place where Mom's memory was alive, to pay for Jason's orthodontics when you could have easily afforded it from your own income. You needed nothing. You wanted. There's a difference. Susan wanted a bigger house, luxury vacations, a dirt bike for Jason, all funded by what you thought was my inheritance. And you let her convince you it was justified. Marcus appeared at the table with perfect timing, setting down a bottle of wine I hadn't ordered. Compliments of the house, Miss Richardson. Your grandmother's favorite vintage. He disappeared before Dad or Susan could register the name he'd used. Miss Richardson, Susan said slowly. He called you Miss Richardson? I own this building. Well, Richardson Hospitality Group does, which means I do. This restaurant, the apartments upstairs, the coffee shop next door. Grandmother bought this property 15 years ago when the neighborhood was struggling. Now it generates about $400,000 in annual profit. I poured myself a glass of wine, not offering them any. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to return every penny you took from the probate estate. The college fund, the proceeds from the beach house sale, all of it. You'll place it in a restoration account managed by Martha Chen, and it will be distributed according to grandmother's actual wishes. And if we refuse? Susan demanded, her true colors finally showing. Then Martha files suit. Breach of fiduciary duty. Fraudulent misrepresentation. We have recordings of Dad claiming authority over assets he doesn't control. We have the waiver you tried to trick me into signing. We have documentation of every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to steal from me. And we'll pursue it all. You'd sue your own father? Dad asked, looking genuinely shocked. You'd steal from your own daughter, I countered. I guess we both have our limits. Susan stood abruptly. This is blackmail. We'll fight this. You can't. I can. And I will. But here's what you need to understand, I don't actually want your money. I don't need it. I have more money than I'll likely spend in my lifetime. What I want is for you to acknowledge what you did. To recognize that you tried to betray me, and that there are consequences for that betrayal. Emma, please, Dad said, and for the first time, he sounded like my father again. Can't we work this out as a family? We stopped being a family when you let Susan dictate your relationship with me. We stopped being a family when you replaced Mom's memory with Susan's preferences. We stopped being a family when you decided Jason's wants mattered more than my needs. What do you want from us? He asked quietly. I want the money returned. I want a written apology acknowledging what you did. And then I want you to leave me alone unless you're prepared to actually be my father again, not just Susan's husband. That's not fair to Susan, Dad protested. Then choose. Choose Susan, choose your new life, choose Jason. But understand that choice means you're choosing not to have me. You can't have both, Dad. You've proven that over the past 3 years. Susan grabbed her purse. We're leaving. Come on, David. Dad looked between us, torn. For a moment, I thought he might stay, might actually choose me for once. Then he stood, following Susan toward the exit. Dad, I called after him. He turned back. Mom would have fought for me. She would have stood up to anyone who tried to hurt me. Even you. Remember that. He left without responding. Marcus reappeared once they'd gone. You okay, Ms. Richardson? I will be. Thanks for the wine. Your grandmother used to sit in this exact booth, he said gently. She'd come in once a month, always alone, always with a book. She'd sit here for hours, watching the harbor, and I think she was planning. Thinking about the future, about what she'd built, about what came next. She was good at planning. She was good at a lot of things, including knowing who deserved her legacy. He refilled my wine glass. Dinner's on the house tonight. Order anything you want. Stay as long as you like. I ordered grandmother's favorite meal, lobster risotto and grilled asparagus, finishing with her beloved crème brûlée. I sat in her booth, drinking her wine, watching the harbor lights reflect off the water, and felt her presence more strongly than I had since her death. She'd planned this entire scenario. She'd known Dad would fail the test, known Susan would reveal her greed, known I'd need the resources to stand up to them. She'd spent years building not just a financial legacy but a lesson in human nature, a demonstration of how money revealed character. Martha called as I was finishing dessert. They just arrived at my office. Both of them, demanding to speak with me immediately. And I told them my office hours are by appointment only, but I could see them tomorrow at 9 a.m. Susan called me several creative names. I've been called worse. What do you think they'll do? They'll fight at first. Susan will push hard, convince your father they're entitled to something. But eventually, they'll realize they have no leverage. The law is clear, the documentation is solid, and fighting only costs them money they don't have. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then they'll cave and return the assets. After that? She paused. After that, you need to decide what kind of relationship you want with your father, if any. I honestly don't know. You don't have to decide tonight. You have time, resources, and the security of knowing you can survive without him. Your grandmother made sure of that. 3 weeks later, the money was returned. Dad transferred every penny back, accompanied by a letter that was more excuse than apology. Susan had thought, they'd believed, they'd meant well, they'd been trying to be fair. No acknowledgement of the betrayal, no real understanding of what they'd done. I donated the entire amount to various charities in grandmother's name. College scholarships for hospitality students. Grants for single parents starting small businesses. Funding for hospice care programs. The beach house money went to cancer research in Mom's name. If they'd been trying to take Jason's inheritance, I'd make sure that money helped people who actually needed it. Dad tried calling a few times over the following months. I didn't answer. Susan sent emails that ranged from apologetic to angry to threatening. I blocked her address. Jason, who probably had no real understanding of what had happened, sent me a birthday card that Susan had clearly dictated. I threw it away. Richardson Hospitality Group thrived under my management. I'd spent years learning the business, and now I could finally implement all the ideas I developed. We expanded into Connecticut, purchasing a historic inn that needed renovation and transforming it into a destination property. We developed a loyalty program connecting all our hotels. We invested in sustainable practices and local partnerships. By the end of the year, the portfolio had grown to $81 million. I kept grandmother's apartment in Cambridge, maintaining it exactly as she'd left it. Sometimes I'd go there to sit in her reading chair, surrounded by her books and photographs, feeling the weight of what she'd built and what she'd entrusted to me. On the anniversary of her death, I visited her grave alone. I brought her favorite flowers, white roses, and sat on the grass telling her about the business, about the hotels, about everything I'd accomplished. You were right, I said to the headstone. About all of it. About Dad, about Susan, about who people become when money's involved. You gave me more than wealth, grandmother. You gave me the truth. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of roses and the promise of spring. I won't waste it, I promised. I'll build something even bigger, even better. I'll make sure your legacy matters for generations. And I'll never forget what you taught me, that character matters more than comfort, that integrity matters more than inheritance, and that sometimes the greatest gift is showing people exactly who they are. I left the roses on her grave and drove back to the office, where a stack of acquisition proposals waited for review. There was work to do, a business to build, a future to create. Grandmother had given me the foundation. Now it was time to raise the empire.